Good morning. Can you hear us? Great. We're on the record in case number 2020-390, electronic application of Meade County Solar LLC for a certificate of construction for an approximately 40 megawatt merchant electric solar generating facility in Meade County, Kentucky, pursuant to KRS 278-700 and 807 KAR 5110. My name is Kent Chandler. I'm chairman of the Kentucky Public Service Commission and also serve as chairman of the Kentucky State Board on Electric Generation and Transmission Siting. I'll be presiding over today's hearing. Joining me today via video conferencing are the other siting board members. They are Amy Cubbage, Vice Chair of the Public Service Commission, Mary Ann Butler, Commissioner of the Public Service Commission, who will be joining us soon, John Lyons, Deputy Secretary of the Energy and Environment Cabinet, serving as proxy for Secretary Rebecca Goodman, and Charlie Rowland, Executive Advisor with the Cabinet for Economic Development, serving as proxy for Interim Secretary Larry Hayes. And I don't see Mr. Greer on here yet, but also Mr. Jeff Greer, governor appointee. At this time, I'll caution you to please set your cellular phones to silent. Also, due to the state of emergency, the siting board is hosting this hearing via video conferencing. In addition to the normal courtesies regarding cell phones, I'd also ask that you follow the following tips. Please mute your microphones if you are not speaking. Attorneys, when interjecting, I guess that would just be you, Mr. Goss. When interjecting, please state your name so that the video record is clear as to who is interjecting. If you use a phone for audio and computer for video, please turn off the computer audio, otherwise we will have feedback. If you're in a room with several other people on their own computers, please turn off the audio for all but one computer. Otherwise, there will also be feedback. If another participant is in a nearby office or in close location, try to close doors between offices. Sound carries further than you would think. Please use wired headphones or wired earbuds to ensure that the devices do not lose battery. And also, please keep a computer charger if you're using a laptop nearby in case your battery runs low. Finally, and most importantly, please alert the siting board if you're experiencing technology failure that prevents your participation at any time in the proceedings. Attorneys should contact staff at the previously provided contact information. The hearing today is for the purpose of taking evidence on Meade County Solar LLC's application requesting a certificate of construction for a 40 megawatt merchant electric generating solar facility to be located entirely in Meade County, Kentucky. At this time, we'll have the entry of appearance of counsel. Since we're doing this virtually, Mr. Goss, I would also ask that when making your entry of appearance that you also identify your witnesses. For the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very nice to see you this morning. My name is Mark David Goss with the law firm of Goss Sanford in Lexington, Kentucky. Mr. Chairman, we have several witnesses available for cross-examination today. I'll list them for you. Chris Killenberg, who is the project's regional development director. He's the project coordinator and most knowledgeable about the details of the project, and probably will be the principal witness. We also have Mike Clark, University of Kentucky professor of economics and director of UK Center for Economic Research at the Gatton College of Business, who provided the report on the economic impacts of the project. Further, we have Rich Kirkland with Kirkland Property Appraisals, Raleigh, North Carolina, who prepared a study on the project's effect on property values. We have the Honorable Mike Grimm, who's an attorney and tax partner at MCM CPAs in Louisville, who has worked on and confirmed real property and tangible property tax calculations for the project. We have Marcia Terre with Copperhead Engineering Consultants. He has prepared an acoustical analysis, also the EEC's cumulative environmental assessment report for the applicant. He has worked on the wetland and stream delineation report for the project, as well as the threatened and endangered species report. Next, we have Tim Choate with the engineering firm of Baker, Farmer, and Workman Consulting in Paducah, Kentucky. Mr. Choate has prepared a traffic and fugitive dust analysis report for the siting board's consideration. And finally, Mr. Chairman, we have Jason Boston with Lineback and Funkhauser Consulting, environmental engineers out of Louisville, who has prepared the Phase 1 environmental assessment report for the project. As I said, Mr. Chairman, all these witnesses will be available for cross-examination. And let me say while I have the floor, to the extent that any of the witnesses are not needed, and we know that up front, it would be most appreciated if we could let those folks go. And that may not be the case. That's your call, of course, but I offer that up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Goss. And for the citing board staff.
Jennifer Phil.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fell. Mr. Goss, I checked this morning. My understanding is that public notice was published and the proof was filed into the record on, I think, the 8th. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And are there any motions outstanding other than the single confidentiality petition?
No, sir, not on behalf of the applicant.
Okay. All right. I believe, going from memory, it usually fails me, but that the public notice included language pursuant to previous commission orders, at least, that provided notice to the public as to how to indicate their interest in providing public comments this morning. And I believe that the Public Service Commission website has also included that information on how to sign up to provide a public comment. Do you know, Ms. Fell, has anybody signed up to provide a public comment this morning?
None, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. And other than, I believe, the Kentucky Industrial Utility customers and Big Rivers, we haven't, I don't have that we have any other written public comment. So I'll just indicate to the public, for anybody that may be watching and interested, written public comments may be provided to the Public Service Commission at any time during the pendency of a matter. You can do so in writing and mail that to the Public Service Commission at 211 Sauer Boulevard in Frankfort, Kentucky, 40601, or you can email your public comment to the Kentucky Public Service Commission by emailing to psc.info@ky.gov. We ask that if you provide public comment on a matter that you include your first and last name, your address, and the case matter, or the case number for that matter, which in this case is 2020-00390. Mr. Goss, I would ask at this time, we usually call the first witness for cross-examination. Of course, as the applicant, I think you ought to have an opportunity when you call a witness, since you did not file any, pre-filed direct testimony. If you'd like to conduct any direct examination on any of your witnesses, I feel like you should have an opportunity to do so. So I think you probably have a preferred list that you would like to call your witnesses at this time, and so you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I am going to offer them strictly for cross-examination. The report or the record is rather lengthy, and I don't know that we need to belabor the hearing or the record with a lot of direct testimony. So I'm just going to qualify the witnesses, Mr. Chairman, and then just make them available for cross-examination. I think the witness probably most applicable to the application and can provide the greatest amount of testimony would be Mr. Killenberg. So I would formally call Chris Killenberg.
All right, Mr. Killenberg, please turn on your camera, turn on your microphone, and please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Chris Killenberg, 15 Albert Lane, Little Compton, Rhode Island, 02837.
All right, thank you. Mr. Goss, you may ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Killenberg, since you do not have a curriculum vitae in the record, I do want to take just a couple of seconds here to get your qualifications in the record. First of all, tell the citing board what your duties and your job in this particular project were or are.
So my title at Community Energy is Regional Development Director, which involves both directly leading management of solar projects and also managing others who do so. In this case, I was the lead developer for this particular project, which encompasses really all aspects of the site development, the design, the placement, the selection of the site, landowner agreements, studies, permits, etc.
And how long have you been working with the development of solar projects in your career?
I've been working for community energy for almost 10 years now. The first projects I developed were finalized just at the end of 2011, so about 10 years.
And how many projects have you seen to conclusion?
There are 34 projects that I've developed that are either constructed and operating or in the construction process at this time.
And take just a couple of seconds to talk about community energy. Tell the siting board who community energy is.
So community energy is what I would call a pure developer. We do all the upfront work for solar farm projects, from market identification to site selection, all the way up essentially to shovel ready. We do own a few small solar farms. We have managed the construction of some solar farms, but our core business really is the development, the front end of it. The company was founded 21 years ago, is privately held. The company is headquarters outside of Philadelphia, a second office in Boulder, Colorado, roughly 60 people in the company, and we're active in solar development across the country.
And approximately how many solar projects has community energy seen to conclusion?
I don't have that number at the top of my head, I'm sorry, but it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 or 70 in total. Our projects range in size from rather small, so some of the projects that even I worked on early were 1 megawatt in size or less, up to our largest project so far that's been constructed is 120 megawatts, and everywhere in between. So depending on the market, we may do small community solar projects or large utility solar projects. But I think at this point that we're well over a gigawatt of capacity that we've developed that's in production today.
Right, and approximately how many states have projects been developed in? I know you don't have the exact number, but approximately.
So pretty much every state east of the Mississippi, and then a handful of western states. Our focus is pioneering in new markets, and so we're not particularly active in California and Arizona and places that are already well covered by other developers. But I would say probably 2/3 of the states in this country, we have projects that we've developed and are operating, or we're actively developing projects today.
All right. Give the siting board an idea of your education and qualifications, please.
So I have a bachelor's degree in economics from Yale University. Prior to joining Community Energy, I was the founder and operator of a number of different startup businesses, and then also an employee for a software company. So had a work record of roughly 20 years before joining Community Energy, and have been with them since then.
All right, thank you. Have you caused to be filed prepared data and information and/or responses to data requests for the application and subsequent to the application in the record in this case?
Yes, I have.
And is there anything in the record that you know now is erroneous or incorrect or should be in any way revised prior to subjecting yourself to cross-examination?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
All right. Do you adopt the application in its or in total, and do you also adopt all of the responses that you've given to various information requests in this case?
I do.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would pass Mr. Killenberg to Ms. Fell for cross-examination.
All right, thank you. Ms. Fell, do you have any questions?
Yes, Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Killenberg. Just a couple of things on the front side here. If at any time you can't hear me well or don't understand the question that I've asked, please just let me know that.
Okay.
And also, just to let you know, if there's any questions that I ask that should be deferred to one of the other witnesses, just let me know that as well, and we'll try not to waste anyone's time here. Most of these questions are going to be follow-up to information that's been provided already in the record, and that staff need further clarification on. So firstly, the Siting Board's consultant report had recommended a site survey map to be created to identify the boundaries to the project, and Meade County Solar responded that an American Land Title Association survey was in progress. Are you aware whether that ALTA survey has been completed?
Not quite. What we've run into, which is not uncommon, is that the deed records in Meade County Registry or Clerk's Office are confusing and incomplete. And so our surveyor, in conjunction with the landowners themselves, has been trying to sort through the chain of title to be sure that we can tie the leased area back to deeds and have a clean title on the project. We're very close to being done with that, but we're not quite done with that.
Okay. Have they given you any kind of estimate as when they think that might be complete?
I would expect within the next 30 days. We're, I think, very close at this point.
I'm not going to ask that as a post-hearing data request at this time because we'll be expecting responses pretty quickly, usually within a couple weeks of those. But at any time that is made available to you, if you could please provide that, file that with the Siting Board, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, Mr. Goss,
I will.
I think
Yes, sir.
that was requested, or the information that would be included in that was requested in that first round of data requests. Do you have any concern of effectively agreeing that when that's completed, that those responses will be updated to include a copy of that ALTA?
No problem whatsoever, Mr. Chairman. I'll write that down and we'll do it.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Stowe.
Thank you. Also, in response to the Siting Board's consultant's report, it was recommended that Meade County Solar update the property ownership records. In response, Meade County Solar stated that there was an amendment in progress to one of the leases for a property that had changed ownership. Without getting into any information that is pursuant to a motion for confidentiality, can you clarify which property that is being referenced there?
So the Bennett family holdings, which is the parcel at the northwest extreme of the project site, Mrs. Bennett passed away recently, and so their daughters are in the process of settling the estate, after which it will change ownership and we will amend the lease accordingly.
Okay, thank you. At this proposed site for this solar facility, it's been largely agricultural in nature, and there's the presence of tiling for drainage purposes in one of the fields. The Meade County Solar has stated that they would make commercially reasonable efforts to locate the tiling on the project site prior to construction, and that during construction, if that tiling is damaged, the Meade County Solar would repair the tiling. Just curious if you could explain if any efforts have been taken already or what efforts might be taken to locate that tiling prior to construction.
Yes, so we've tried to get secure the original map and layout of the tiling, which doesn't seem to be available. Absent that, I've been exploring technologies that could identify the tiling from the surface, LiDAR, ground penetrating radar, that sort of thing. I believe there is a technology available to do that may work. We're trying to explore that. Absent that, to be honest, the best we can do is just be cognizant as we go as to whether or not we're hitting any tiles. When you're trenching for underground cables, for instance, that's easy, you'll see it. Driving posts is a little harder. We have an interest in this site draining properly. It doesn't help us to do anything detrimental to the drainage. So we're going to be very interested in maintaining the integrity of that tiling, but it's a little tricky because the materials they're made out of are hard to identify with surface penetrating technology. So we're looking into it, but I don't have a solution quite yet.
During the planning of this project, there was a cemetery that was identified within the site. I may have just overlooked something in the record, but are the boundaries known for that cemetery at this point?
Yes, yes, it exists at the top of a hill on the Scott Hill Farm property, which is at the Stith Valley section of the site. It's very well indicated from the surface. There's a fence around it, and what will pass near there, but at a significant distance, is an underground cable connecting the two sections of the project site. So we shouldn't be anywhere near the cemetery, and we know where it is.
Okay. I don't believe I saw any map that had identified the boundaries of that cemetery. As a post-hearing data request, I would ask that you just provide a map that identifies the boundary of the cemetery.
Okay.
And I'd also ask you whether there are any plans for vegetative buffering around it. Sounds like you said there's just going to be a cable running near it. Will there be solar panels surrounding it as well?
No, there will not. There will be no solar panels in any near proximity to it. We'll be probably 1,500 feet away from it.
Okay. As far as the project site, is there any, in Discovery we're aware of there may be some need for temporary electric service to the site. We've gone over that. But will there be any water, internet, or phone service that's expected to be provided to the project site?
So the project will ultimately need to communicate with Big River's system, but the location of that communication between the project substation and the point of interconnection is relatively short, and I would imagine there we'd have a direct line to theirs and not be relying on internet or local telephone, et cetera, for connection to Big River's grid. So I do not at this point anticipate needing any other utilities provided to the project other than tapping into local distribution electric for miscellaneous power needs of the project.
Okay, thank you. And this site consists of essentially two areas that will be connected via a connector with underground lines. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. In response to staff's first request for information, Meade County Solar provided that there are various easements that have already been procured for this, but it also mentions where it will cross under Kentucky 333 and Big Spring Road, that there was an encroachment permit that needed to be secured from the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. Has that been procured yet?
It hasn't, because the exact location of that crossing hasn't been identified and typically wouldn't be until much closer to construction. So at this point, we're satisfied that we understand the process, that there's an application and some engineering details to be provided. And it's a question really of how you cross under the road, not if we're allowed to. So we're satisfied that we will be able to meet the requirements at that time, but the specific location wouldn't typically be determined at this point in time.
Has the Army Corps of Engineers responded to the approved jurisdictional determination request?
They have not yet. We are still awaiting their response.
In the final order, we'll be providing a map of the site, basically boundaries. And in response to the first data request, item 34, there was an attached map of the preliminary site plan that was dated May 10th of 2021. And that is the site plan that had been approved by the Meade County Planning Commission. But in the application, there are several exhibits with a preliminary site plan that was dated May 19th of 2021. Are you aware whether there's any notable differences in those maps?
To the best of my knowledge, those maps should be identical or are intended to be identical.
Okay, thank you, that clears that up for us. There's been public comment filed in the record by Kentucky Industrial Utility customers, and there's a concern regarding the statutory deadline for the final order in this case. And they state that the power purchase agreement that was reached with Meade County Solar gives Meade County Solar the option to terminate the purchase power agreement if a decision is not reached by the siting board by October 31st, 2021. Can Meade County Solar explain if has there been any amendment or adjustment to the purchase agreement?
So I'm aware of the letters that have been filed in the docket. I know there are ongoing discussions between our executive and senior managers of Big Rivers, but I am not a part of those discussions. My role here is the site developer and all the issues of the site itself. The issues that we're talking about today, the scope of these proceedings. So I'm just not privy to what's going on in regard to the PPA and able to give you an answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. And that's all the questions I have for you at this time, Mr. Killenberg. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Secretary Lyons, do you have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Killenberg. How are you?
Good morning. Fine, thank you.
Just clarification on the amount of acreage in the property. Is it in total 370, or is that project footprint in a bigger area?
No, 370 should be the right number, yes.
Okay. I was going through y'all's response to the commission's request for information, and I was interested in particularly the phase 1 addendum on Appendix D regarding the oil and gas wells. And I just need a little clarification there. Looks like y'all listed 12 wells, but I was a little confused about how many may be located on this property. Are there any located on this property?
There are 2 wells located within our project footprint broadly. They'll be carved out of the project footprint, but they'll essentially be surrounded by solar panels, put it that way.
And the associated flow lines, I believe you all said there wouldn't be any encroachment on those, and that you all have talked to the lessees or the operators of those wells?
We have, yes.
We've had this in one other case where there was oil and gas wells on the site. What kind of assurances do you have that there may not be some more exploration on that property? Have you taken any measures to ensure that somebody may not come in and want to drill a well on the rest of that property in some manner?
So each of the leases that govern the wells that are within, if you will, the project site contain surface rights that are limited and or expire and currently only apply to the existing wells themselves. So it's our best understanding right now, having done the title work, that there are no other holders of surface rights on any of the rest of the project site that would have the right to come in and displace the solar panels and drill, excavate, explore, etc.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Rowland?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And has Mr. Greer joined us? I don't see Mr. Greer. Okay. Vice Chair Cubbage, any questions?
Yes, just a few, thanks. Good morning, Mr. Killenberg.
Good morning.
I want to talk about the karst terrain. that's already been identified at this site, since I know there's already one, opening / sinkhole, and there have been some caves identified in the general area. Have you all developed a construction plan to deal with possibly running into karst features, including possibly causing another cave-in or sinkhole?
So we've identified the karst features on the site, and our current plan is avoidance of the existing features. And what we've committed to Meade County is that we will leave a 25-foot buffer off the periphery of the sinkhole, or a 70-foot buffer off the open throat of the sinkhole, whichever distance is greater, and basically avoid the sinkhole entirely and build around it. And we think that's an appropriate distance. We've been advised by consultants, but also I would note that the state regulations for the installation of the septic system is a 70-foot distance from an open throat. So we feel like we're not nearly, don't represent the kind of environmental concerns the septic system would to groundwater and other things in the subterranean area. As we go through the project, we may encounter other karst features where such features would keep us from driving posts into the ground, which are the foundation for solar farms. We will use a precast concrete pad and just lay it on the ground and attach our posts to it. And that may happen in a number of locations across the site. We don't know yet. I have not been advised by anybody yet that our activities, pounding posts or other construction activities in and of themselves are likely to open up a new sinkhole on the site. So I'm not aware at this point that that's a risk.
Okay, I know you just said you're not aware of anyone saying that. Have you specifically explored that issue, or has just no one flagged that?
No, we've explored the karst issues, and I think here we have a consultant, Marty Marcheter, who can speak to that if you'd like.
Okay. If you have to go to the concrete pad stability approach, for lack of a more technical term, have you included that in any decommissioning plans, how you're going to deal with that if that becomes necessary?
So it would be included in the decommissioning plan by default, in that our obligation is to remove everything from the site above and below ground. In this case, a precast concrete pad would be simply sitting on the surface of the ground and would just need to be picked up and hauled away. So it's not a deconstruction or a major excavation or a foundation that we would pour into the ground. It's just a big slab of concrete to which we would bolt a post rather than pounding the post into the ground.
Okay. Have you discussed whether or not any proposed contractors you might use for the pile driving or the pad instruction have experience with karst terrain?
I have not discussed that, and I'm not aware of that. When you say experience with karst terrain, I believe the contractors that we've used in the past would have some experience, but I don't have any specific information from them in regards to difficulties or other special methods that they would have to deploy now.
Okay, I think that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Killenberg.
Morning.
I have a few questions for you. I'll start where the vice chair left off around the decommissioning plan. Are you aware of the requirements of the planning and zoning ordinance surrounding the decommissioning plan for the proposed facility?
I am.
Okay. Has the applicant began conducting that decommissioning plan or creating that decommissioning plan?
So we've created a framework for the decommissioning, which is an obligation to decommission at a legal level, also an agreement to post security funds to fund that decommissioning should we fail to do so. The specifics of the plan generally come together much closer to production or construction because it relies on the details of the construction itself. How many posts, how many panels, how many pounds of steel, miles of copper cable, etc. So typically in these projects, the fine details occur much closer to production. But at this point, we made commitments both to our landowners and to the county around our obligations to decommission, restore the site, and to secure that those obligations through financial security.
So the decommissioning plan has to be filed with the Planning and Zoning Commission at the time of the application for a construction certificate, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you're currently, this hearing is on the construction certificate from the state. And it's too remote from the time that you actually conduct the construction that you can't provide the decommissioning plan. At what point, how many days, months, years will it be between this hearing and when you apply for a construction permit with the county?
So typically the pre-construction period for these projects takes approximately 6 months. And usually 3 months prior to construction, you will have the final design of the facility, and at that point could provide this more detailed plan. I would say we have filed a plan with the county. It's just at a high level at this point. But later we will fill that in with the details that are specific to the construction. As for the timing, it depends on a lot of things. Currently, this project is scheduled to start production before the end of 2022. One of the delays that we're experiencing is studies back from MISO, the regional transmission operator, that would tell us whether or not the point of interconnection can accept the amount of generation we're proposing and or what upgrades would be required. And that process is quite significantly delayed. And as that continues to get delayed, our commissioning date gets delayed as well. But if you back up from our commissioning date, the pre-construction design would really begin in earnest about 6 months prior, and we'd have a final design about 3 months prior.
Well, I appreciate all that, but so you're saying you provided a decommissioning plan to the county,
Correct.
but you did not provide the decommissioning plan in response to the requests in this case. Is that right?
No, I think what I'm saying is the plan that we have at this point is high level. It is a series of commitments that are both legal and financial to decommissioning, and a description of our responsibilities under that decommissioning. But I don't know now what the cost of the decommissioning would be, specifically because I don't have the final design of the project. I don't know what the offsetting salvage value of the materials would be because I don't have the design of the final project. So at this point, again, I think the plan as it exists today is a framework into which the details will be filled as we get close to production.
Well, and I can appreciate you don't know what the net salvage is today for something that will happen in 40 years from now. What my question is, have you filed something with the county that is more than just a recitation of the language in their ordinance?
We also provided them the language in our leases with the landowners that describes our responsibilities legally to them under the leases. And I'll have to review to see if we provide additional information than that. But I know we also provided that information.
So my question is, as a post-hearing data request, provide us, the siting board, with everything regarding the decommissioning requirements and plan and obligations under the ordinance and I don't have the ordinance number in front of me, but the ordinance, everything you filed with them on decommissioning up to now, to file it with us.
I'll be glad to do so.
Okay. So you have two separate areas. We're going to stay on the decommissioning for a second. You have two separate areas of 300 acres and change of land that are connected by, I think it's something, like a 2.2 mile underground or 1.2 mile underground medium voltage transmission line. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So you have this underground transmission line. Do you have a copy of the decommissioning or the ordinance available to you?
I couldn't quite hear the question.
Yeah. Do you have a copy of the ordinance and the decommissioning provisions of the ordinance available to you?
I can probably get it pretty quickly.
Well, so let me ask this question while you're doing that. Is it your understanding that the decommissioning obligations under the ordinance apply to that intermediate or that transmission line connecting the two separate locations?
I guess because our decommissioning obligations to our landowners include that obligation, I hadn't thought of it differently in terms of our obligation to the county.
Well, but let me ask Mr. Killenberg, you plan on using utility easements for that transmission line, correct?
But when you say utility easements, do you mean public right-of-way easements?
That's right.
We do not.
Okay, so the maps, when you're moving along the road with that transmission line, you will have individual leases?
Yeah, well, we'll have individual easement agreements with private landowners. So our line will travel in the next 25 feet outside of the public road right-of-way on private property until it crosses underneath the road perpendicularly and continues. So in no cases will we be using public road right-of-way as our easement path, except for that portion where it crosses underneath the road.
Okay, so do the easements contain the same decommissioning provisions as the leases?
They do.
Okay, and so you have the decommissioning obligations under the easements and leases. So going back to my question, if you do have it available to you, do you know if the provisions of the decommissioning obligation in the ordinance apply to that transmission line? And specifically, I think that I'm looking at section 4.3.7.2.
0.7.2. I was looking at a different section, so let me back up.
Yeah, so I think you may be looking at 4.3.7.3I, but if we could start with 4.3.7.2, which I think describes what a solar energy system is.
Right.
And
in 4.3.7.2, the definition level 3 solar energy system is what applies to this project.
right, so level 3 is anything that's not a 1 or a 2.
Correct.
Correct? Okay. And so the design standards there, when it says a solar energy system SES is, do you see that?
I do.
So tell me if what I say is wrong. A solar energy system SES is the components and subsystems required to convert solar energy into electric energy, so that converting part, suitable for use or placement on the electrical grid, including transmission lines, transformers, and substations. And then it goes on to say the area of the system includes all the land inside the perimeter of the system, which extends to any fencing, and areas required to connect to the electrical grid, including transmission lines, transformers, and substations. And then it goes on to talk about it being divided into 3 categories. And so my question is, given the decommit, well, we'll just go on from there. So 4.3.7.3 Point one, contract attorneys, there's something about them. So,
I'm with you.
so it's the decommissioning of a level 3 SES system. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
Okay. And so we've already defined in that section we were just looking at an SES, what it is. And then it talks here about, it says here in 1, the developer shall post a surety bond or other form of security acceptable to the county for the abandonment of the site, and in the event the commission must remove the facility, remember facility was discussed above, abandonment shall be when the SES ceases to transfer energy on a continuous basis for 12 months. The surety bond or other form of security shall be 100%. It goes on to include basically the description of net salvage. And then 2 discusses what the plan at the time of application by the developer responsible for the decommissioning must include. And it provides all the stuff that it has to include, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my question is it the company's perspective, are you aware of whether it's the company's perspective that these decommissioning obligations and the description of what is obligated to be decommissioned and fall under this bond includes the transmission between the 2 locations of electric generating equipment?
That is our perspective. That's our obligation to the landowners. I would read section 2B broadly to say removal of all non-utility owned equipment as including those transmission lines. But I am also completely open to a condition of this or any other permit being that we clarify that.
Okay. And you mentioned something earlier about above ground, below ground. The decommissioning obligations under the ordinance is not specific as to being both above and below. It just says all. Are you aware whether the applicant has a perspective as to whether there's a depth limitation as to what level facilities must be before? Let me ask this. Is there something that can be placed so far into the ground that you all are under the perspective that it does not fall under your decommissioning obligation?
There is not. Okay. So the deepest embedded piece of equipment is going to be one of those posts that forms the foundation of the solar farm. And it may go 6-8 feet into the ground and it'll pull right back out and be removed completely. Generally, the buried cables, the concrete pads, things like that are going to be at most 3 foot in depth. We may, where we're crossing some farm fields, put a little extra depth on it just to be sure they don't get hit by a plow, etc. But it's our perspective that everything comes out.
Okay. So there's another thing I'm curious if you're aware of. You're in Rhode Island, is that correct?
I am, yes.
You all have 811 up there in Rhode Island?
We do, yes.
All right, so call before you dig. So are you generally aware of the call before you dig laws?
What was the last aware of? I'm sorry?
The call before you dig laws?
Oh, yes, I am, yes.
Okay. And so you wouldn't be surprised to know that Kentucky has an 811 program and a call before you dig requirement? Okay.
I would expect they do, yes.
So there are certain, how do I say this? There are certain exceptions to the call before you dig. There are certain activities that a person can undertake that they don't necessarily have to call before they dig. And one of those is a farmer tilling their own land. Let me see if I can find this here. It's not right off to me. But there are a number of exceptions. Let's see here. To people who do not have to call ahead of time. And one of them is literally a person tilling on their own property. And so my question is in the event, especially this line that you're running across individual farms, at what depth do you propose to locate that line?
So I believe our easements specify 3 foot or, greater or lesser as necessary. Generally, I would answer that with 3 feet, which is generally deep enough to avoid any farm implements. But we are in collaboration with the landowners. In this case, 2 of the landowners currently row crop the land over which the on top of the intended embedded lines. One is just woods, and the other is pasture. I understand that things may change over time. These easements will be recorded, and as a long-term operator, we'll have an interest in making sure that everything works and there's no interruption to our service, et cetera. So, but the general answer to your question would be 3 feet, which is generally deep enough to avoid farm implements.
Okay. And then you've done a few of these projects. Do you all follow? Do you all call before you dig?
Yes, and even in this case, I'm not, and maybe one of the guys on the phone could answer this, but we did geotechnical testing on the site, and my guess is they did an 811 call before that. Any kind of excavation and the construction itself will be conducted by professional contractors who I would assume do that as their normal course of business.
One last question on that subject. We have found, what did you say, an issue with the contractors having violated the call before you dig law, but there be no ultimate responsibility for those who have contracted for those services, especially in the event that those contractors are out-of-state entities that leave and that are impossible to provide service on. And ultimately come in, cause damage to underground facilities, and then exit the state with no recourse. Are you aware of the processes that you all go through in contracting with these entities, and whether or not items like that are addressed in those agreements?
I'm not aware of that specific issue, no.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Who is the immediate owner of, let me get this exactly right, Meade County Solar LLC?
So Community Energy Inc. is the owner, and I guess would be the member, since it's an LLC, the managing member of Meade County Solar LLC.
Community Solar Inc.?
Community Energy
Okay.
Inc.
Community Energy Inc. Okay. Does Community Energy Inc. own other LLCs with the intent to build generating EGUs, electric generating units?
We do. That the standard, our standard business model anyway, which is not uncommon, is to create a project-specific entity for each project, an LLC that we have ownership of as we are investing in and establishing the rights and the assets of that project. And then at some point, we will sell our ownership in that LLC to a long-term investor, owner, operator.
So do you intend, do you know whether or not Community Energy Inc. intends on selling Meade County Solar LLC?
The very high likelihood is that we will do that because that is our typical business model.
You find it unlikely you will, or you find it likely you will?
No, I said that I would say yes. The very high likelihood is that we will do that. That is our typical business model, yes.
Okay. And you were, there are a number of minimum filing requirements related to applications with the siting board. One of them is filing requirement KRS 278-706 2K. And the question is effectively, or the requirement is to provide a listing of all violations for violations of state or federal environmental laws, rules, or regulations. Are you aware of that response that the company provided?
I'm aware of the response. I assume that we have not violated any of the regulations you listed.
Yeah, and so my question was going to be, you were the respondent to it, and that was your response, that there are, I'll just read it here. Neither Meade County Solar LLC nor any person or entity with an ownership interest in Meade County Solar LLC has violated any state or federal environmental laws or regulations. There are no known actions, whether judicial or administrative, pending against Meade County Solar LLC, nor any person or entity with an ownership interest in Meade County Solar LLC. Does that sound accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So,
that sounds accurate.
I'm just curious as to how you formulate that response. Not calling into question your response. I'm just wanting to understand how you read the requirement and how you responded to it. Is that answer, so forget Meade County Solar LLC. I understand that's very straightforward. When you're looking at answering that, are you answering that by saying, when you say, nor any person or entity with an ownership interest in Meade County Solar LLC, does that response, is that specific to Community Energy Inc.? Let me withdraw that question. Is that answer exclusive to Community Energy Inc.?
So I think if your question is how do I approach the answer to the question? I approach the answer to the question is, has Community Energy been found in violation of, et cetera? And the answer is no.
Well, and that's what, so Community Energy Inc., right, that entity, does it operate does it own any facilities?
We do, yes.
Itself, not own an LLC that owns facilities, but Community Energy Inc. actually owns facilities itself?
So here, so Community Energy has a number of legal entities under its umbrella, if you will. And I confess, I can't tell you whether Community Energy Inc. or some affiliate is the owner of the solar farms that, to a layman, to me, I say we own and operate. So I can't confirm that Community Energy Inc. is the entity that owns those owners at this time. We can certainly get back to you.
Well, and here's why I asked Mr. Killenberg. I just want to understand exactly what the representation is, right? Is the representation that when you looked at, you read the question, you read the requirement, and then you went and looked to see if it was the case. And what I'm curious of is, did the search begin and end with whether Community Energy Inc. has any violations, or whether any entity above Community Energy Inc. has any violations, or whether you also looked at whether or not Community Energy Inc. and any of those facilities that you were discussing, right, that they may have an ownership interest, have violated any federal or state laws, rules, or administrative regulations regarding environmental compliance?
So my understanding and the intent of the answer is to be universal, that that all of the company, its affiliates, its individual employee, all of us, none of us are subject to any environmental violation proceedings, et cetera.
Okay.
That was the intent.
That's very helpful.
And that's my knowledge too. The best of my knowledge, as broadly as you cast the net, none of us, no entities have been subject to any environmental violations.
Okay. That's fair.
Violation, whatever, charges.
Next, I'd like to ask about the soil erosion plan. Has Meade Solar conducted the soil erosion plan?
So yes, we have available to us the consultant to produce that study, yes.
Okay. Are you aware if that plan has been filed in this case?
Sorry, so what we've produced is we're sort of back to the other dynamic, a framework for how we're approaching soil erosion. A more specific plan will be developed once the final system is designed, which will be specifically describing the soil erosion management practices during construction and afterwards, et cetera. Stormwater management, all of that, which again is dependent upon the final design to determine what our footprint is and where water may or may not go, et cetera. So what we've filed or provided to the county in this case is a high level description of our approach to erosion.
Okay. But you're saying that there will be a detailed soil erosion plan filed at a later time, not filed.
Well, yeah, that'll be required by the county and state. Erosion control plan, a stormwater management plan, all that will be required in order to get our construction permits.
Right, but it'll be after you've either received. Well, it would have to be after you've received a certificate from this board.
It would on this current timeline, in that, again, pre-construction is still quite some distance away.
Okay. Does Meade Solar intend to enter into an industrial revenue bond agreement with Meade County regarding financing this facility?
We do not.
The point of interconnect. Are you aware in the application there are some initial maps that show the point of interconnect in relation to the distance from homes, and specifically, I think it's PDF page 16, which is Exhibit 2 attachment, page 3 of 3. Do you have that available to you?
Let me pull it up. Sorry. And I'm sorry again, this is the original application.
Yeah, the original application, the first part of the application, PDF page 16 of 515, Exhibit 2 attachment, page 3 of 3.
Exhibit 2 attachment, page 3 of 3. Okay, so yes, okay.
Okay, and do you see the point of interconnection?
Yes.
There, the top left-hand corner of the map.
Yes.
Okay, and then you see it runs, I assume red, indicating to be proposed to be built transmission line down to a red box that's within the project footprint. Do you see that?
Correct. Yep.
So the red line down, does that represent the transmission line proposed to be built to connect to the, I don't know, the Big River 69 kV line?
Yes. So the red box would be our project substation or collection substation, where all of the electricity we're generating gathers, and the transformer exists there to step the voltage up to 69 kV. And then that red line emanating to the northwest would be an underground line going to the POI would come up a newly installed pole in that black line, which is the Big Rivers transmission line, and then there'd be switches mounted at the top of the pole. So the point of interconnection infrastructure is really a pole-mounted switch is what it's called. One additional wooden power pole with some switches at the top.
Well,
And it'll be fed by an underground line coming from our collection substation.
and that was going to be my question. Does it require its own switching station, or what facilities will be there? Does that individual pole that maintains the connecting transmission line, is that protected? Well, I say protected. It's two-way protection. Does that require any additional security under any SC standards that you're aware of? Is there fencing that's required around that pole? What does that point of interconnection facility look like to that home that's within, approximately 450 feet of that interconnection?
Right. So it'll look not too dissimilar from the typical transformer mounted on top of a pole. It's just, instead of a transformer, it'll be a series of switches. But it will be a pole with the equipment at the top of it. And I do not envision it as having or requiring a chain link fence around it. It's not substantively different than any of the other poles and the equipment at the top of the poles that you would see in that line.
So I guess, excuse my ignorance, but how does it get from the ground to the top of the pole?
It'll go up the side of the pole. So typically you'll see a gray PVC hood that'll run up the side of the pole, and the wires will be inside of it.
Okay. And at 69 kV?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And I guess the last question, and I'm probably going to say his name incorrectly, but Mr. Marcheter, I believe, has done some soil water study in this case and provided it. Is that in satisfaction? Is that the actual plan that you intend to use to satisfy the soil erosion plan required under Meade County's ordinance? Or will that require a more detailed plan? I just want to make sure that I'm straight on that.
So we provided it at the point of the conditional use permit with Meade County, and they were satisfied that it met their requirements at that time. They understand, and it is our intention to provide a more detailed plan as we approach construction, which again would be required anyway in order to get the building permit here. So that's our current, I guess, position on the issue.
Okay. All right, Mr. Goss, do you have any redirect to Mr. Killenberg?
No, Mr. Chairman, I do not.
Okay. All right, Mr. Killenberg, I don't think we'll need to recall you, but since you're the person that apparently knows the most about it, I don't think the rest of this hearing will last all that long. If you could stick with us, we'd appreciate it before you excuse you, but you may step down. I know you're not going anywhere, but there's not another term for it except for step down.
I will stay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Goss. Well, let me ask.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt. In your questions, there were maybe a couple of things that Mr. Marcheter could answer. And I don't know if he would be the logical witness to call next for cross-examination. I can certainly, I've given you the list, and we're happy to make any of the witnesses we have available to you or staff or any of the siting board members. So I'll leave it to you as to how you'd like to proceed procedurally.
Yeah, let me do this, Mr. Goss. Do any of the siting board members or staff have questions for Mr. Clark or Mr. Grimm? Mr. Clark provided the economic analysis, and Mr. Grimm is here to speak on the tax implications, the tax implications of the economic analysis.
Staff might have one question for Mr. Clark.
Okay. All right, so we'll hold on for Mr. Clark. Does anybody have questions for Mr. Grimm? Okay. Hearing none, I think, Mr. Goss, it's safe to say that Mr. Grimm can be excused for the remainder of the hearing. We appreciate him being here. I'd love to talk to him about the tax implications, but it's
Okay, Mr. Chairman,
it's a
thank you.
short it's a short
Mike,
day. So
You're free to go.
Thank you. We appreciate him being here. And Mr. Kirkland is the property valuation expert, talking about property values in the vicinity of the project. Does staff have any questions for Mr. Kirkland?
Just a couple for Mr.
Okay,
Kirkland
so
as
we'll
well.
stick around with Mr. Kirkland. All right, I think, Mr. Goss, we will have a few questions for folks. I don't know how many questions. It's already 10:15. I'd like to give you an opportunity maybe to sort of maybe have a short discussion with your witnesses if you would like. I think it may be a good time to take about a 5 or 10 minute break. And then hopefully we'll be able to wrap up in a few minutes upon coming back. How about we take a recess until 10:25?
That'll be fine, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, we'll be back at 10:25. All right, we're back on the record. Mr. Goss, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I can hear you.
All right, great. You can call your next witness.
Mr. Chairman, if I could inquire, and I should have done this before the break, we had two other witnesses. If you don't mind, let's run through those and see if anybody has any questions for them. That would be Tim Choate, who prepared a report on traffic and dust, and then Mr. Boston, Jason Boston, who did the Phase 1 environmental assessment.
Yeah, Mr. Goss, I had a question for Mr. Choate.
Okay,
And
great.
I assumed we needed to keep Mr. Boston just in case
Okay,
Deputy Secretary Lyons or the Vice Chair had follow-up questions to the things that we're sort of touching on, and myself even, with
Perfect.
Mr. Marchetair.
okay, all right. Let's go ahead and call Mr. Marchetair then. I'll call Marty Marchetair to the stand, Your Honor.
Mr. Marchetair, please turn on your camera, your microphone, raise your right hand. All right, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Marty Marchetair, and I live at 1300 Fontaine Road in Lexington, Kentucky, 40502.
Okay. Mr. Goss, you may ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Marchetair, I think you previously provided a curriculum vitae in the record. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. If you would tell the citing board for whom you're employed and what you do.
I work with Copperhead Environmental Consulting out of Lexington and Paint Lick, Kentucky, and I'm a senior environmental planner with about 30 years of environmental experience, and my background is I'm an attorney, and I've just always been involved in environmental issues.
Very good. Sir, have you caused to be filed multiple reports in this case and also provided responses to multiple data requests also?
That is correct.
Do you have any revisions, amendments, or edits to any of those reports or any of the responses that you've previously given to data requests in this record?
No, we don't.
And do you adopt your various expert reports and your responses to data requests as your testimony and or responses for purposes of today's hearing?
I do.
Thank you. I tender the witness for cross-examination, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Ms. Fell, do you have any questions?
Chairman, I'll defer to you. I know you have a follow-up for
Okay.
Mr.
So we'll start. Deputy Secretary Lyons, do you have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just a couple. Good morning, Mr. Marchetair. First, I want to say I really appreciate Community Energy Solar putting such an effort into this aspect of their application. I hope we see other applicants do follow suit in the future. On the threatened and endangered species evaluation, Mr. Marchetair, I see that you all did a Kentucky biological assessment tool evaluation as well as Federal Fish and Wildlife IPAC. There was a couple of things. I'll start with the IPAC. Determined that there was one critical habitat overlap on the property for the Indiana bat. Now, I saw your all's response to commission staff data request and how you would avoid impact to that species and any other bat species that may be around the project area. But was there a specific area in the project footprint where that critical habitat was identified? I wasn't clear on where that might be.
Well, actually, the critical habitat, it's actually a cave where 2 Indiana bats were found in 2011, and it's about 4.2 miles southwest of the project area. So we're in the sort of swarming buffer zone around that cave.
Okay.
So we're not going to have any direct, and we don't anticipate any significant indirect effect for bats.
Okay, thank you for that. I wasn't exactly clear whether that was on the project footprint or not. Also, you received a letter after you asked for a Kentucky biological assessment from our Office of Nature Preserves. You did get a letter back November the 29th of 2020, and I got to admit this is the first time I had seen one of these assessments done in one of these cases. So I had a lot of questions for our nature reserve folks and did do that. But there was a determination that the project does pose a concern. And so I was interested to know exactly what that concern was. With that assessment, y'all did get a list of species generally associated with historical prairie habitat in that area, which is something that I know our nature preserves is interested in trying to restore and enhance some of that historical critical habitat. I don't know if there's been given any thought to that and to that response. I'd like to hear your response to that. But well, first, let's hear your response to that, Mr. Marcheterre, in that particular letter that you got back from Nature Preserves.
We did. We usually try and ask nature reserves as well, just to kind of see what their familiarity with the area is. One, because they have they're one of the leading for plants. They're probably the leading experts for that in the state. And we usually touch base with them. It is more the historic prairie. I mean, this area has been converted to farmland and is actively being used for agriculture, for probably more than 100 plus years. So we don't anticipate, in the short term, yes, there'll be a little bit of disturbance and there will be the solar farm. But then when it's removed, we're not significantly affecting the soils and habitat. It will be restored back to what it is prior during decommissioning. So we anticipate that it would have, very low impact, long term for the historic prairie. So we realized it, we saw it, but we did not, consider it as being a significant issue. We can look at it a little more if you'd like us to, and we can respond if you'd like.
Yeah, I think what we would encourage, obviously we can't require this, but is there any pollinator areas planned for this project? I did not see that in this footprint.
I can let Chris respond to that, but yes, my understanding is yes, there will be some pollinator fields incorporated into this project.
Well, with that in mind, Mr. Killenberg, I think what we would encourage is to work with our nature preserves in lieu of pollinator fields, maybe look towards restoration of some of this historic prairie area. Those seed banks are there in the soil and can be just as good a pollinator area as buying a general seed mix from seed company. So we would encourage that. Sonny Carr is our executive director of State Nature Preserves and would be very happy to help in that respect with her staff. So I would encourage that, at least to look at that possibility, explore how that may be done in lieu of just the traditional pollinator approach. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, so if it always feels like the legislature knew what they were doing, adding the Secretary for the Cabinet for Economic Development and Energy and Environment Cabinet on these. Thank you, Mr. Lyons. Mr. Rowland, do you have anything?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Vice Chair Cubbage?
Yes, just a few. Good morning, Mr. Marcheterre. I also want to echo what Deputy Secretary Lyons said about the completeness of the application and the forthrightness of community energy in including all of the environmental reports, primarily with the application as opposed to us having to drag them out. And I do encourage other applicants, if they're watching, to do the same. And I know it may feel like that then you get beat up because you've provided them and we have questions about them, but it is very helpful for us. But my questions, you'll not be surprised, will be about the karst terrain. And I know you are not personally a geologist. Did any geologist with Copperhead look at this site and make any assessment of whether there may be other shallow karst voids that need to be avoided?
Well, actually the sort of preliminary sort of geotechnical site characterization study was done by Vector Engineers out of Shelbyville. And so they went out to the site and did some preliminary, they did, I think, 14 borings, as well as kind of look at the site, both historically and, what they could see while they were out there. And, there is, no surprise, it's a karst area, so there is always that possibility. But they just said it's something that could be managed. And as you can see, the plan is to, put buffer zones around known sinkholes and, especially ones with open throats.
Yeah, no, that's helpful that, and that may not have been filed, it may have, there's a lot of stuff and I may have just missed the, geotechnical report, but it gives me some comfort that there has been one done here. And I'll just be transparent. I grew up in the next county over essentially, and I remember sinkholes opening quite often, so I'm familiar with this karst territory. And I don't think it's a complete barrier to construction, but I know it is something that has to be managed here. So that's my only question for you and just, I guess, soapbox statement. So that's it. Thanks.
Commissioner Butler, any questions?
No, sir.
Mr. Marcheterre, I'd like to ask about the soil erosion plan. Did you conduct the plan that was filed with the Meade County Planning and Zoning Commission?
I did.
Okay, and is that exact plan that you filed with that Planning and Zoning Commission filed in this case?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I want to make sure I get the question correct.
Is the plan that you conducted and filed with the Planning and Zoning Commission of Meade County, are you aware of whether or not that exact plan has been filed in this case?
That I'm not sure. We'd have to double check with Chris or Mark David Goss to see if that was submitted.
So belt and suspenders here, I'll ask Ms. Fell to file that ask that as a post-hearing data request, so that is filed into the record. It's the soil erosion plan required under the ordinance of Meade County that's been filed with Meade County. I'm curious how the soil erosion plan fits in with the concerns of the vice chair, the questions the vice chair has had around the karst geography. Is there anything specific in the soil erosion plan to the concerns around the karst geography?
Sort of at the, I want to say it's sort of at that 10,000 foot level. It's really, as we were putting it together, we had discussions with the groundwater division, Division of Water, partly to ask about, groundwater protection in sensitive areas, which this is a karst area, so it's considered one of the sensitive areas in the state, and asked if they had any similar plans that they've used for solar projects. They had not ever, actually, we were the first ones to ask, and they said within a couple of days we got a few other questions from other solar companies, but no one else had really been talking to them, so they've not done those type of plans for a solar project. But we said we would be in touch further as we develop the more detailed soil erosion control plans, just to kind of touch base with them, because we wanted to make sure we consider BMPs that would, help protect groundwater. So that is kind of the long-term plan, and sort of discussed there generally about what we did and what the long-term plans are.
Okay. And have you or anybody involved with this project that you're aware of, discussed this issue with folks in other states that have, Kentucky has something like 64 megawatts of solar total installed. And a good portion of that is on top of people's homes. So other states have quite a bit more in the ground than we do, and we're certainly not the only location with karst geology. Certainly not the only in the South. So I was just curious, have you all spoken to anyone from any other states as to their experience with solar generation siting in areas with karst geology?
We did. We've reached out just to sort of see what folks were doing in other states in terms of the level of studies, as well as, also sort of BMPs. And so we intend to sort of include that in the future. But right now they kind of gave us the same answers of, we try to be careful, try to put buffers. So it's a lot of the things that were already intended for this project. So we didn't get any, we were hoping to get a little more of it, as always you would look like for templates that other folks could, that you could use, but we've not received anything that specific.
Okay, and as part of that outreach, I know that your CV has some projects in the Tennessee Valley area or for the Tennessee Valley Authority. Was any of that outreach to the TVA?
It was. No, we regularly work for TVA. We actually have a IDI2 contract with TVA, so we work with their environmental folks regularly.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Marchetair. Mr. Goss, do you have any redirect to the witness?
No, I don't, Your Honor.
Okay. And Ms. Fell, is there any reason that Mr. Marchetair can't be excused?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Goss, would you like to call your next witness?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'll call Mike Clark.
Mr. Clark, please turn on your video, your audio, and please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Michael Clark. My address is 2535 East Point Drive, Lexington, Kentucky.
Mr. Goss, you may ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clark, would you tell the citing board for whom you're employed and what your duties are?
I'm employed by the University of Kentucky. I'm an associate professor of economics, and I'm the director for the Center for Business and Economic Research.
And have you previously provided your curriculum vitae in the record in this case?
Yes,
How long have you been working as an economist?
for well over 25 years.
Have you caused to be filed an expert report and/or responses to data requests in this case?
Yes,
Do you have any revisions, amendments, or edits to either your report or any of your data request responses that you'd like to make today?
no,
Do you fully adopt your expert report and all the responses to data requests that you've given and that are in the record in this case for purposes of today's hearing?
yes.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I tender the witness for cross-examination, Mr.
Ms.
Chairman.
Fell?
Good morning, Mr. Clark. Just a couple questions for you from staff. The economic impact study that was prepared was based on a time frame of 30 years of output of the generation of power for this proposed facility. However, the contract for sale of power to Big Rivers, as it currently stands, is only for 20 years. Were you aware of the 20-year contract when you performed the study?
When we performed the study, we actually did some calculations based on 30, some based on 20. In the case where we were looking at kind of long-term impact, we basically did 30. There was some discussion in the analysis about the output, and that output was based on contracted, or the value of that output was based on contracted prices. And those contract prices were good for 20 years. So for that part of the analysis, we used a 20-year contract period.
Okay. You said that there were some calculations performed based on the 30 years, and those were long-term impacts. Are there any calculations that were performed in that report that would necessitate amendments or changes based off of that 20-year contract?
Well, the 20-year contract, as I understand it, and this may be something that we have to get Mr. Killenberg's thoughts on. The 20-year contract was used as length of time for the output and given the value of that output because we had contracted prices from there. Presumably, the 30 years would represent maybe a longer period if the expectation is that the life of the project would be longer than the contract of 20 years.
Correct, and that's our understanding from reading the application. When you were performing this study, or to your knowledge, does Meade County, this solar project, expect any trouble re-entering a new contract for sale with Big Rivers? That may be a better question to ask Mr.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just saying that may be a follow-up we need to ask Mr. Killenberg, but to your knowledge,
I would have no knowledge to be able to answer questions about the contract.
okay. Thank you. That's actually all questions staff have this time.
Vice Chair?
No questions?
Or I'm sorry, I went out of order. I'm sorry to surprise you. Deputy Secretary Lyons?
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank
Mr.
you.
Rowland?
Yes, Dr. Clark, thank you for being here with us this morning. I just had a couple questions. In your report, you estimate that during the operational phase, there will be an increase in jobs, somewhere between 3.4 and 5 jobs during the operational phase, but that there will be a reduction in $41,000 in labor income. Is there any way to estimate what that $41,000 dollars would mean in terms of the number of jobs?
That's a more difficult thing to get at because those are lost agricultural jobs. And agricultural jobs tend to be counted very differently. So they're not as comparable to what we would normally think about in terms of jobs. But what you can get a sense of is that, in terms of the general impact in terms of wages, there's not as much of a loss in terms of wages supporting employment as the potential gains that you would see from the actual employment within the solar plant itself.
Okay, thank you. And then last question, you estimate that the current agricultural output at the site right now is around $136,000 a year. Do your estimates contemplate a complete reduction in the agricultural output during the operational phase?
In this case, we've assumed loss of that. If the land is, however, continued to be used for some agricultural purposes, then you wouldn't anticipate the entire loss.
Okay. That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Commissioner Butler, any questions?
No questions at this time.
Okay. Dr. Clark, I just have one line of questions about the actual in-plan models that you use. As I mentioned earlier, Kentucky has almost no large solar facilities. The largest facility in Kentucky is 10 megawatts. That was built a few years ago. One, how do you account for that in attempting to sort of stratify the economic outputs, and that there's not much to speak of in terms of historical use? And then second, how, if the plan is updated as if some of these start to get built, will the software automatically update with that new input to sort of be more detailed with economic data about specific to Kentucky and primarily the rural areas that these are occurring in?
So to the first question about the lack of data in plan for Kentucky, that is correct. There's not a substantial amount of information in Kentucky. In those cases, what we do is we look to the relationships we see in other states. So for example, you can look at what's going on in maybe a neighboring state that's fairly similar to Kentucky that does have these types of projects. And that gives you a general sense of how a change in one of these types of facilities could affect local employment. And so in those cases, we're basically kind of extrapolating from what we're seeing in other areas. Going forward to your second question, yes, over time, as we start to see data on those types of relationships in Kentucky, the model would be updated. It's likely that it's going to take a long time, however, before we actually start seeing those relationships to the point where we can model them in Kentucky with Kentucky data.
Sure. How much time do you need for that? How many projects do you need that those start showing up, or that you have the ability to, for lack of a better term, click on that Kentucky-specific historical data?
There probably need to be quite a few projects related to this, and one of the issues that we have is actually seeing the data. So it takes a while for the employment data to actually start showing up, and so data that we have tends to be lagged. So you would probably be seeing a couple of years before we're able to get to a point where we're actually able to model this specifically with only Kentucky data.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Clark. Mr. Goss, do you have any redirect of Mr. Clark?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just one question. Dr. Clark, by employing a 20-year time period in your model for output, is that actually a more conservative, what I would call a more conservative approach than modeling output for 30 years?
It would be, assuming that the contract is renewed over the life of the project. If the project, is longer than 20 years, then you would anticipate additional output over and above what we have estimated.
So had you wanted to maximize the economic impact of this project for purposes of this case, you would actually have used 30 years for output in your modeling rather than the 20 years. Would that be a fair statement?
That's correct. We could have put a larger number on output by extending the time period beyond 20 years.
All right, thank you. That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Goss. Any reason Dr. Clark can't be excused?
No, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. You may step down.
Thank you.
Thank you,
At this
Mike.
time, given that we've gone through Mr. Marcheterre, did any of the siting board members or staff have questions for Mr. Boston, who I think conducted, on behalf of Mr. Marcheterre, the Phase 1 environmental assessment?
Staff have no questions.
Okay. All right. With that, Mr. Goss, I think that Mr. Boston may be excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it.
Mr. Goss, would you like to call your next witness?
Yes, sir. I would call Richard Kirkland to the stand.
Mr. Kirkland, please turn on your camera, your microphone, and raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Richard Kirkland, 9408 Northfield Court, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27603.
Mr. Goss, you may ask the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kirkland, I believe that your curriculum vitae has been filed in the record in this case. Is that correct?
I believe so.
With that said, give the siting board an idea of the number of years of experience you have as a property valuation expert.
I've been appraising for around 25 years. I'm a commercial appraiser with a focus on land and, easement issues. I have MAI through the Appraisal Institute. I have had specifically about 12 years looking at solar farms. I do impact study analysis for a wide range of uses, but I've been looking at solar farms for the last 12 years.
All right, sir, thank you. Have you caused to be filed an expert report and or responses to data requests in the record in this case?
I have.
Do you have any revisions or amendments to either your report or any of your data request answers that you need to make today?
I do not.
Do you adopt your expert report and all the answers that you've given to data requests as your testimony and or responses for purposes of today's hearing?
I do.
Thank you, sir. I tender the witness for cross-examination, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Ms. Fell, do you have any questions for Mr. Kirkland?
Yes, just a couple. Good afternoon, Mr. Kirkland. Just a couple questions for you. As you're probably well aware, there's been some disagreement regarding the property value impact in this proposed project. And one of the concerns has been in regards to the view shed and its potential impact on individual property values, specifically adjacent property values, and concern that this project is only proposing to provide vegetative screening in areas where none pre-exist to a height of 7 feet, where the panels have been described as potentially reaching up to 10 feet. Does this have any impact on your conclusions regarding potential impact on property values to adjacent properties?
No, it does not.
Okay.
I can go into detail or just leave it at that.
Okay. And then secondly, there's concern, and it's been mentioned in comparison to some other solar projects, they've included what's called a neighborhood or good neighbor agreements, wherein a utility essentially makes payment to adjacent landowners in order to, I don't want to put it in the wrong terms here, but potentially object to the construction of such a solar facility. Are you aware, have there been any neighbor or good neighbor agreements reached in regards to adjacent property owners with this project?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you. That's all from staff for this time.
Deputy Secretary Lyons?
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Rowland? I take that as a no. I saw your mouth moving and it looked like no, but it didn't come through. So Vice Chair,
No questions.
Commissioner Butler,
No questions.
Mr. Kirkland, I just have a follow-up to that. Are you aware of those types of agreements that Ms. Feld was asking you about?
I have read about that instance that was brought up in opposition to my report, but I've worked in literally hundreds of these projects, and I am not aware of those being an active part of any of the projects that I've worked on.
Okay. And would that show up in your studies, your comparison studies as to whether or not adjoining landowners, whose property adjoins or are close to facilities, whether or not they've been compensated in any way for the location of facility?
Again, the data I'm pulling is from the market sales themselves. So if there was any outside agreement that would be outside the deeds and normal market transactions, no, that wouldn't be triggered. You wouldn't find that. But it also wouldn't affect what I've looked at, because since those would be outside of the agreements, that wouldn't really be changing these actual sales prices being looked at. So what I mean by that is the sales prices are still remaining competitive with other sales prices. And even if there is an outside agreement of some sort, it's clearly not being reflected in the market transactions.
And then finally, do you have an expectation? Some of the studies are fairly recent. I think there was a 2020 University of Texas study that I've seen a while back. But I guess my question is, as these, I think nobody could doubt that the amount of solar that's being built across the United States is increasing. I think that when you do that, it's undoubtedly moving from probably more rural areas as the best land is taken into more populated areas. Do you have an expectation that there will be additional studies on that front to indicate whether we'll call it the best locations are taken as they move to, as solar facilities are built in greater numbers, that there will be additional Can you hear us now? Great. We're back on the record in case number 2020-00390. Sorry, we had a technical malfunction. My question, Mr. Kirkland, is as more of these get built and they begin to be built closer to more inhabited areas, do you have any expectation that additional studies will indicate whether the closer to homes they're built, whether there is any additional impact to home values? Oh, we can't. Can everybody else hear Mr. Kirkland? All right. Well, we can't hear him in the room, which means we likely can't record him. So, Mr. Kirkland, if you just take a second, they may need to do something in the back room. We want to make sure that we have the complete recorded hearing here. All right, can you try now, Mr. Kirkland?
Can you hear me now?
We can. We can. I apologize. Please start over again. Third time's the charm.
Sure. No, I expect that there's going to be ongoing research into this topic. I've been interviewed a number of times from different university groups as part of different projects. I was interviewed by the Texas study you referenced earlier. I worked with them on, I think, 3 different occasions in setting up that analysis. I've been interviewed by Nino Abishads, who published a paper and part of her doctoral thesis at Georgia looking at agricultural farm values in proximity to solar farms. And I know that she's currently working on looking at houses in proximity as well. So I do expect there to be more information on this as time goes on.
Okay. All right. I appreciate it, Mr. Kirkland. Mr. Goss, can you redirect to the witness?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any redirect. Thank you.
Is there a reason Mr. Kirkland can't be excused, Ms. Fell?
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kirkland. I step down.
Thank you.
Mr. Goss, I think you have one more witness. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I would call Tim Choate to the stand.
Okay. Mr. Choate, please turn on your camera, your microphone, and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Okay. Please state your name and address for the record.
Tim Choate, 118 Arbor Crest Drive, Mayfield, Kentucky, 42066.
Okay. Mr. Goss, you may ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Choate, I believe that your curriculum vitae is contained in the record. Is that correct?
Yes.
Just generally speaking, tell the citing board who you work for and what you do and how many years you've been doing it.
I am employed as a project engineer for BFW Engineers, Bacon Farmer Workman Engineering in Paducah, Kentucky. And I have worked in doing transportation engineering for some 40 plus years. And I am a registered professional engineer in the state of Kentucky.
And I believe that you formerly worked for a number of years with the Kentucky Department or the Kentucky Cabinet for Transportation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. I'll get it right. How many years did you work for KTC?
20 plus years.
All right. Mr. Choate, have you caused to be filed an expert report and or responses to data requests in the record in this case?
Yes.
Do you have any revisions or amendments to either that report or any of your data request responses that you need to bring to the attention of the citing board?
No, sir.
Do you adopt your expert report and all the answers that you previously given to data requests as your testimony and or responses for purposes of today's hearing?
I do.
Thank you, Mr. Choate. Mr. Chairman, I tender Mr. Choate for cross-examination.
Ms. Fell, any questions?
Staff have no questions.
Deputy Secretary Lyons,
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Rowland,
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
the Vice Chair,
No questions.
Commissioner Butler.
No questions.
Looks like it's just me, Mr. Choate. What I'd like to know, and I don't necessarily glean from the report, and frankly, maybe it's my fault. We've had 6, 7, 8, 10 of these projects we've already got final orders out on, and I really failed to fully understand this issue around road permits for projects like this. You know, the applicant, if approved, when they're building these, is going to be carrying thousands and thousands of pounds of I-beams or some other pole that they're going to drill into the ground. They're going to have to, locate at the site. They're going to have to move at least one wood pole. I would assume maybe a couple of others. Significant substation equipment in the form of transformers. Not to mention about 100,000 solar panels, right? That's all in addition to bulldozers, front-end loaders, whatever equipment is used to tamp to pile drive or tamp these poles into the ground. In an ordinary, and this one is I hope representative, but in these cases, in these instances of construction, what type of agreements do the applicants or their contractors enter? What kind of agreements do they enter into with state and county road departments regarding transportation, damage, or even just plans around traffic?
Well, in general, the entrances that would be used, primarily you're referring to the construction of the facility. The entrances would be permitted by the various agencies, county or state.
And when you say permitted, I'm looking for a little specificity here. Do they have to? Let's just take, for instance, is there a single permit that will cover all the, let's say, transportation of everything to the site? Will there be a single permit with the county and the state, or one with the state, one with the county around that transportation, or is it specific to a particular type of, whether it be amount of weight? I'm just curious, when you say permit, what exactly are you talking about?
And I can speak more from the state standpoint because that's what I'm more familiar with. But obviously, some of these entrances, I believe, are currently being used for farm entrances now. Some of them may not even be entrances. But anytime there would be any kind of land use change, the state would require that permit to be issued for that particular entrance, depending on what it was being used for. And I would think it would probably be considered a commercial entrance, just due to the time span of the construction. I think that's what the state would consider. The county, I'm not sure. Counties vary across the state as to what their requirements are for using entrances.
So let's take a step back then. So you're saying if a entrance is either the type of use of an entrance is changed, the use of a current entrance is changed, or a new entrance is added, each one of those entrances will require an additional permit. Is that your testimony?
Yeah, I think that would require what the state would consider essentially an entrance permit or an encroachment permit, giving the permission to use that facility to access at a particular location.
Okay. And then for the transportation of significant oversized loads or loads that exceed a certain weight, are there additional transportation permits that are required for that?
That kind of gets into the interstate trucking legislation, which I believe has been adopted by the state of Kentucky. And the way I understand it is small trips from let's say assuming all of this equipment is going to be transported by truck on primarily coming from interstate system. Obviously, federal highways only allows 80,000 pounds on the interstate system without additional permits for overweight or over-dimensional permits. So assuming that these loads are going to meet the 80,000 pound limit, then there are laws that govern that, which the state has adopted as well, that's the federal law, would allow trips from those interstate facilities or higher rated roads to lower rated roads. And I believe those trips are allowed up to 5 miles.
We've had a number of orders, and I'm interested how this mitigation provision would apply to this case or in your experience. We've had a number of cases in which we've required a mitigation measure that obligates the applicant to pay for damage caused by transportation transportation to and from the site. And that's about as specific as it gets. Although there's been a caveat, I think, in one or two that discusses that damage that's caused for transporting something to the site that may be covered by a permit, whatever is included in that permit is controlling. So my question is, are you aware of plans or permits that explicitly have terms in them, in your experience, that may or may not include this project, that include provisions regarding damage to roads or bridges, and how that damage will be paid for by the party?
I have had some experience, and I know there is such a thing out there. Is you could require the user or the applicant or the contractor to bond the road, whether it was either with a county agency or the state agency.
Okay. And is that an agreement that the state has that you're aware of, or is that an agreement that a county has?
I believe, I think the county, I don't know about particular this county, but I know counties do bond the county roads for things like this, as well as the state would.
Okay. And are you aware of anything specific in this case with the applicant here, whether or not they've entered into any of those agreements?
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here today. Mr. Goss, do you have any redirect for the witness?
No, Your Honor, no redirect.
Okay. Is there any reason that he may not be excused?
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Choate, you may be excused. Mr. Goss, is that your case today?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I think that, Mr. Goss, this is not your only case in front of us. I'm sure you've seen, we have the old saying go, we have more of these than Carter has little liver pills. So we've ruled on a number of the petitions for confidentiality similar to the one that you provided for those leases in a very specific way. So I suspect that we will have that order out in fairly short order ahead of the final order ruling on that petition.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Do you have anything else, any motions that you need to make before we adjourn today?
No, Your Honor, I guess the only thing we probably need to talk about is the length of time. I have 3 written post-hearing data requests, and I know staff will serve written data requests on us, but it may be advantageous for us to talk about, the time period that we'll have to respond to those, unless you just put it in the order, put it in a post-hearing order as a matter of course. The only thing that concerns me just a little bit about timing, a couple of them are, provide, 2 of them are provide plans that we've already submitted to Meade County Planning Zoning. That's no big deal. The other one is creation of a map for the cemetery boundary, and that's not something that I don't think Mr. Killenberg can do or would feel comfortable in doing. So we're going to have to get our mapping people to get started on that, and that may take just a little bit of time to do. So, if we could have maybe 14 days from today to make sure we allow ourselves enough time to get that map to you, that would be helpful, or whatever other time you think is appropriate.
Well, so, Mr. Goss, I'll be frank with you. My concern with giving you 14 days is that would put us to 28th. I know we're not the Public Service Commission, but I tend to dabble in those cases every once in a while. I think there would be an interest on our behalf in at least trying to meet that that imperative October 30th date that was asked by staff earlier regarding that PPA that underlies this project. I have an expectation you won't be able to speak to that interaction. Is that accurate?
Which interactions?
Between-
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, no,
I'm
the
not sure.
so the PPA, Ms. Fell asked Mr. Killenberg earlier about Mr. Kurtz's letter that was filed as a public comment. in
Yes,
this case.
yes, I'm sorry, yes, I understand what you're saying. Well, I mean, we're very aware of, and I think you mentioned this before, I mean, first of all, that letter, I think, involves a procedural issue, not a substantive issue, and it doesn't have really anything to do with whether or not we are entitled to a construction certificate, or whether or not we meet the standard. Certainly, I am familiar, being a regular practitioner before the commission. This is not the commission, this is the siting board, but for administrative purposes, might as well say the commission. We are aware of your caseload. We are aware that, that you're spread a little bit thin, and you have some other statutory deadlines, that you have to meet. We're not asking for expedited treatment. If the commission or if the siting board wants to give expedited treatment, that's certainly your prerogative. That this is something that's been asked by somebody else, frankly, in a case that in a PPA case that was that's already been closed by the commission. So that's strictly up to you. It is procedural, not substantive, but that's really about the only comment that I've got.
Well, it's hard to unknow things once you know them. I was around when that PPA was approved and sort of aware of the public terms of the operative dates in that agreement. And so I'd like to think the legislature knew what they were doing when they made the membership of the siting board what it is, with the three public service commissioners, certainly someone from the two cabinets. I guess my question is, if we're planning on operating to try to get an order out before the end of the month, out of an abundance of caution from that perspective, if you need additional time, is there any direction that you could provide in writing to the siting board as to whether or not that is still an operative date? I'd like to give you, let me say it this way, Mr. Goss. I'd like to give you as much time as you need in consideration that we have a statutory deadline in this case. But in the event, I think we'd like to work towards getting an order out before the end of this month on this matter.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the reason is, we know that this facility is being built for a very specific purpose, and there are agreements and dates, operative dates related to that very specific purpose that we're working towards. If we knew from a statement from the applicant that operative date is not as important, or can be waived or whatever it may be, I'd be happy to give you 2 weeks to get that map.
Well, frankly, it might take just as long to do that as to get the map. So if you want to, 14 days was what I asked for, because I don't know what's going to be involved. I would say we could get the mapping people to drop what they're doing, and if you want to reduce that by some period of time to meet whatever deadlines you have internally, I'm more than happy to try to get it to you quicker.
Well, and the reason I mention that is I believe it would be reasonable to get that map, today's the 14th, to have that filed by close of business on the 20th.
Okay,
We'll get those questions out before the end of the day, Mr. Goss, with the proposed post-hearing schedule. That we will be asking those post-hearing requests today with the response by the 20th. Now, with that being said, Mr. Goss, you certainly will have the opportunity after that order is entered to ask for relief from those dates and those time periods, given
Okay.
if you have any more direction or information that would, one, indicate that maybe additional time may be available, or two, additional time is necessary in order for you all to be able to provide that map.
okay. All right, that's fair enough, Mr. Chairman.
So that will give us an opportunity to put something on the record to work towards the dates we're working towards, and then give you all the opportunity in the world for, seeking relief or additional time or whatever it may be in writing once you have an opportunity to speak with your client.
All right,
All right, and of course, Mr. Goss, we don't set post-hearing briefing schedules in these cases. I believe either the regulation or the statute speak to the opportunity for the applicant to file a brief following an evidentiary hearing. And I think that's, if I'm remembering right, it's at 7 days. So, of course, you have that right should you choose to do so. It's my understanding, Mr. Goss, that a final order must be entered in this case by November the 30th. Is that your understanding as well?
yeah, that's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, and other than that outstanding petition for confidentiality, is there anything else that we need to take care of today?
No, sir, we appreciate the siting board's time.
Okay, and one last thing I wrote in my notes here, Mr. Goss, to just remind you that if during the pendency of this case, the ALTA is finalized, the ALTA plan is finalized, that you all file that as an update to those data requests that sought information on it. I think those were the first one or two, maybe the first three questions of the first round of data requests.
Oh, okay, thank you. We will do so.
Thank you. Is there anything else, Ms. Fell?
Nothing further.
Okay. Anything else from the other siting board members? All right. I appreciate all your all's time and attention today. I hope you have a nice afternoon. Be adjourned.
Thank you very much.